If I was about to forget every comic story I'd ever read, but could first record a message for myself just before the mind wipe, this would be the result.
You're a wonderful man, and you're satin tights.
Condor Man, da-da-da-ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues, where I talk about my favorite DC comics of the past that are still affordably available today, blabbing about why they're special to me and what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, this series does freely contain spoilers, but I think even spoiled, the stories I feature in this series are still worth reading. For more info about the intent of this series and what to expect from it, you can check out the video on the Christian Geek Central YouTube channel titled Essential Issues Series Introduction. Okay, we've covered some key origin stories from DC Comics. Now we're finally moving out of kind of the origin story phase of this series and getting into some of the key or influential, I think, DC stories that had a major impact on the DC universe and on some of its characters. And this time we're looking at Cosmic Odyssey. This one was written by Jim Starlin and with pencils by Mike Mignola. This was interesting to come back to today. I wouldn't say it's the best read, but I think story-wise it has some really interesting things going on, maybe more on the thematic side, actually, than the story itself. And the art really was better or more enjoyable, maybe I should say, than I remembered. So let's get into it. The first thing I think I noticed about this series coming back to it is the art. Mike Mignola is best known, I think, for as the creator of Hellboy, and you can really see that style here, particularly in the way that he draws Darkseid's face. And I think when I originally read this, the art looked a little rough and maybe weird to me, but I've begun to appreciate over the years more and more how much the style of art, even if it looks kind of rough and rugged, can feed into the feel and the tone of a book, much in the same way that a filmmaker will use different lighting or color palettes to kind of create a tone or a mood. And so going through this again, the art alone is what really makes it worth the revisit to me. I can't say that I appreciate the dialogue as much. In fact, I find the dialogue in this whole series to be very formal sounding. All the characters kind of sound a little bit the same. It sounds like the way they talk from day to day is almost in prose. I think today, if this were written with a lot of like narration boxes instead of like dialogue bubbles, maybe it would read better with an omniscient voice kind of expressing through prose what is happening in the story. But having it come out of the characters' mouths, it just doesn't really feel right to me and doesn't represent the way I think of these characters. In the opening of the story, we've got Superman teaming up with Light Ray, one of the new gods of New Genesis. He's a good guy. And this whole story is a nice introduction, I think, to the new gods and to Apocalypse. It's by far not the best or most engaging story that has to do with the Apocalypse and the new gods and stuff like that. But I think that it's a nice introduction to them. Not because it explains everything about who they are, but it just kind of gives you a taste of each character that's really pivotal in those new gods stories. Darkseid, who reigns on the planet Apocalypse, is sending a bunch of his soldiers to, once again kind of scout the Earth and try to set up an invasion. And it goes south. Superman and Light Ray stop it. They retreat back through their boom tube, but one of them is left behind. One of these normal foot soldiers is left behind. And so he has to figure out how he's going to survive on this planet. Meanwhile, Darkseid runs into Metron, who has just returned traumatized from some kind of an experience seeking out information about the anti-life equation, which is kind of like the big MacGuffin that Darkseid is always after, that will give him the ability to destroy the universe or rule the universe, that kind of thing. He has his scientists retrieve Metron and the data that he collected to figure out what he can glean from this and how he can use this knowledge of the anti-life equation to his advantage. What he discovers, unfortunately, is that the anti-life equation is more than what he originally thought it was, and is now posing a threat to the entire universe, and so Darkseid must now, he realizes, team up with the heroes of New Genesis and the heroes of Earth in order to stop basically all life in the universe from being destroyed. And while I'm still talking about that moment, there's this bit of dialogue that really dates the book, as the style does as well, where one of Darkseid scientists reports, "I've transferred the Mother Box's records to tape." Then Batman learns that there's something going on in Gotham City. There are some mysterious deaths, and these turn out to be the result of that apocalyptic foot soldier that has been trying to survive. He's been living in the sewers, and Batman goes down and investigates and finds him and is able to defeat him. And this is like a sequence that I think really would have played better, man, even without any narrative dialogue or inner monologue at all. I think the art just really sells it so well, and I could get the same story virtually and maybe an improved version of it for my tastes without the narrative boxes. When Starlin has Batman's inner monologue saying, "I feel my stomach begin to go and have to rush from that chamber of horror. Now I know who I face, a cannibalistic alien. This thing will not be allowed to continue its vile ways." I mean, that just sounds like really old school superhero type of dialogue. So around this time, we discover that Darkseid is allied with his sworn enemy, the gods of New Genesis, to bring a group of heroes to Earth, which consists of Superman, Martian Manhunter, Starfire, Green Lantern John Stewart, and Batman. And once they're all gathered together on New Genesis, they hear the tale of the origins of this anti-life entity, which was discovered by an advanced civilization thousands or whatever, millions or whatever years ago. So we discover what the current threat is as they talk about Metron's discovery in encountering and accessing the anti-life entity. He discovered that this thing is actually now attempting to enter into our physical universe. It dwells in the antimatter universe, and it's trying to lay the groundwork for its entrance to our positive matter universe by sending out these 4 aspects of itself to basically wreak havoc in different parts of the universe or our galaxy. I don't really remember, but basically it needs to have a certain amount of destruction happen to throw off gravity and just cause chaos, and that will somehow allow it to have entrance into our universe. Very understandably, Batman says, "Well, that all sounds kind of far-fetched," and Darkseid very conveniently says, "This matter concerns sciences I cannot expect creatures of your intellect to understand," Anyway, so these heroes have to split up into teams of 2 and go to different parts of the universe to stop each of these aspects from blowing up the areas of space that they're, trying to blow up, so that they can stop things from getting chaotic and the anti-life entity destroying everything. So the setup here kind of allows the series going forward in the following 3 issues to have these different pairs of heroes bouncing off of each other. On Thanagar, we've got Orion and Superman coming into conflict because they handle things in different ways. Similarly, on Ran, we have Starfire and Light Ray. And on Xanshi, this is probably the most interesting pair-up to me in the, what results from it. We have Martian Manhunter and Green Lantern John Stewart. And then finally on Earth, we have a character named Forager, who's kind of considered a lowly member of the New Gods that Orion has some clearly racist feelings toward. And he's paired up with Batman. And speaking of Batman, and coming back to the writing again, there is this weird bit of writing where Batman gets on a payphone and calls up some mystery character that's eventually revealed at the beginning of issue number 4 of this series. Anyway, gets on the payphone and says, "This is Batman. I've got a job for you. There's a man on the planet of New Genesis named Darkseid. I don't trust him. I'd like you to keep an eye on him. Can you handle it? Great. Be talking to you. What? What? Great! Exclamation point. Be talking to you. I don't know. I mean, I guess I can kind of read that and make it work a little bit in my head, but and then the big reveal at the end of the of the first issue is Jason Blood and Etrigan, the demon Etrigan, who I guess the two had been separated in the DC Comics. Jason Blood was cursed by Merlin to be bonded to this demon that he would transform into, But I guess at some point, I don't really know the history, but they'd been separated, and Jason Blood had been aging really rapidly because he'd been immortal for so long because of his bond to this demon, but they'd been separated, he was aging rapidly, and now Darkseid wants him to rebond with the demon Etrigan because it's going to be vital to the salvation of the universe. And that's basically part of a plan B that, if the other heroes don't succeed in their pair-ups around the universe, then Darkseid has a plan B that requires the demon Etrigan. So most of these pair-ups of these heroes, with anti-heroes in some cases, are fairly interesting. We get to see Superman, who is really a pacifist, really tries to deal with situations with as little violence as possible, and he's teamed up with Orion, who is Darkseid's son. There's a whole story there behind that. And he is extremely violent, extremely warlike, and so having them paired up to try and work through their particular situation together is interesting. Even as the dialogue is not working for me a lot of the time, I think there are some story concepts, some story beats that do keep me interested in wanting to continue through the story. The next pair-up is between Green Lantern John Stewart and Martian Manhunter, and this series is really a major pivot point for the character of John Stewart. Up to this point, he was, I think probably in a lot of people's minds, the Black Green Lantern, which is a bit unfortunate. And they were, certainly playing up his ethnicity in the way they would write stories for him. He had some anger related to civil rights issues, and they would bring civil rights issues in subtle and not so subtle ways into his stories. And that anger also translated to kind of a cockiness, especially as we get to this story. Increasingly, we see him just overconfident in the abilities of his ring to handle any situation. And it starts subtle, and he just gets more and more cocky and arrogant as time goes on. The team-up between Batman and Forager isn't very interesting to me. Neither is the team-up between Starfire and Lightray. So, sticking with the John Stewart Martian Manhunter team-up, John gets struck by lightning, there's fire that ends up, weakening him, and John Stewart is just seeing Martian Manhunter's weaknesses come up more than once. And that ultimately leads to him saying, you know what, I can do this on my own. He basically says, Martian Manhunter, you're obviously not up for this, so I'm just going to seal you in a green sphere to keep you safe, and I'm going to go take on the big bad anti-life aspect by myself. Problem is, at the height of his cockiness, he arrives to discover that the bomb that's going to blow up this planet and start this big gravitational chaos in the galaxy is completely painted in yellow. And yellow at this time was the one thing that Green Lantern rings could not affect in any way. For some reason, I still don't quite understand, despite them showing the other, native alien life forms on this planet dressed very differently. There's a dude sitting with a paintbrush and a paint can, clearly just finished painting the big bomb device, and he clearly looks like some Earth guy, some kind of overweight Earth guy wearing Earth-looking glasses, and I don't know if this was like the artist putting himself in the picture or what that's supposed to be, but it was really kind of, to this day, that doesn't make any sense to me. The anti-life equation in each of these scenarios is always possessing some creature that's native to that planet, so it's just a weird, I don't know. Anywho, the planet blows up. The entire race is destroyed, and the galaxy gets thrown into chaos because the planet gets turned into antimatter and blows up the sun and all this kinds of weird stuff. And in the wake of that, John Jones, Martian Manhunter, who was protected by the force field, he survives and very notably scolds John Stewart and says, "I will never forgive you for this." And John Stewart is just destroyed by this at this point. Completely in shock, completely in remorse, almost catatonic. Ranking number 2 in the kind of interesting interactions between characters teamed up would be Superman and Orion. Superman goes down to, they both go down to this planet, and Superman's plan is like, okay, Orion, you stay up here and cause a distraction so that the natives who are Thanagarians, like hawk people, who are possessed or influenced by the anti-life aspect, they won't get in the way of me trying to shut down the big doomsday bomb that's on this planet. Well, Superman goes and takes care of the doomsday bomb, fights off a robot to do it, and then comes to the planet's surface again to discover that Orion has slaughtered a ton of Thanagarians. And he's like, hey, this is what was required. You know, you asked for a diversion, so I made sure no one interfered in your battle with the anti-life aspect. I was fighting to save my galaxy. I don't play around with such high stakes involved. And then Superman, it ultimately comes down to him just wailing on Orion in anger and outrage over what Orion has done. So again, this is just one way that even though they don't give you the backstory of all these characters, it's a nice introduction to some of the characters that are part of the Apocalypse and New Genesis storylines. You know, Orion is not a superhero like these other heroes. He is much more of an anti-hero, much more complex, willing to kill without any problems. And so, yeah, it's a nice taste of the flavor of the New Gods stories. Even though I don't find the story between Batman and Forager to be all that interesting, of note to me, as someone who kind of likes body horror and stuff, is that the anti-life aspect on Earth took possession of the body of the foot soldier, the apocalyptic foot soldier that had been left behind, that Batman fought with and actually blew a hole in with his own, space ray gun, and so he's like this zombie body almost that's being controlled by the aspect. And so you get some cool, there's a cool bit of combat with just, you get a sense of how powerful not only foot soldiers are and dog soldiers actually is what they think they're called. I keep calling them foot soldiers, but dog soldiers from Apocalypse, even just one of them is enough to create a challenge for Batman. And especially this one being possessed by the anti-life aspect. But it's this cool kind of battle that Forager and Batman have with this giant hulking zombie type guy who's got a big hole in his chest, but you can still see his spine, running down the middle. And so just visually, once again, I really like what Mignola did here. A little later, we cut back to John Stewart, and he is dealing with the fallout of what has just happened. He's gone off by himself, completely distraught. He's saying, all my fault. I don't think I can live with this on my conscience. We'll come back to that in just a minute. Then we go and see that Darkseid has been enacting his plan B since things haven't been going swimmingly with all of the heroes and their missions. But even his plan B, which in his mind also involves him ending up with some anti-life power that will allow him to rule our universe, his plan B with the demon Etrigan is also not going as planned, and so our mystery hero that Batman contacted needs to show up to basically save the day, and that's Dr. Fate. And this is where things get a little bit interesting on a couple of levels. One, we have Dr. Fate uniting the powers of himself, Etrigan, Highfather, Orion, and Darkseid in this kind of big pentagram type thing, which I'm sure, especially in the late 80s, even more so than today, would have made some readers or parents of readers uncomfortable. But he's uniting all these powers, to fight off the anti-life equation. And the language gets interesting here, Sometimes I wonder if we lose our capacity to really contemplate the vastness and other characteristics of God because we just use language recklessly. He says at one point, "How long can even we, with our near infinite might, stand against the truly infinite?" And I'm thinking, well, let's think about this word infinite. Something is either infinite or it's not. It's not almost infinite or more than infinite. It is infinite or it is not. And just a couple pages later, a dialogue box says, or a narration box says, "But even in the grip of near madness, caused by the heady feel of almost omnipotent might. Dr. Fate realizes, etc., etc. And I'm thinking, okay, well, again, omnipotent, something can't be almost omnipotent. It either is all-powerful or it is not all-powerful. I know, it's a minor thing to be harping on, but I do wonder sometimes if the way we misuse words talking about infinite concepts, limitless concepts, we use them in a way that really implies that there kind of could be a limit to them, or it could be a qualified limitlessness. If that doesn't make it a little too easy for us to have a reduced view of God as we use these same words to try and describe him. Anyway, Fate does his magic, which I think kind of anticlimactically saves the day, but there's still the matter of one anti-life aspect on the loose on Earth that needs to be dealt with, because at the very least he could destroy Earth. And so Batman and Forager have to put a stop to that, of course. There's a great moment involving Forager acrobatically diving through the hole in the zombie dog soldier's chest, which was just great, and saving the day, but at the cost of his own life. And this kind of sets up a moment where Batman, in a rage, punches Orion for making one last racist comment about Forager. But I am getting ahead of myself just a little bit. We cut to a scene before the resolution of that plot line where John Stewart is by himself. He has sent his power ring off like 20 light years away and gets out a yellow space gun and points it at his head, and we really linger on this for a while through repeated frames of him holding this gun to his temple as he is preparing to commit suicide. Martian Manhunter, we see, is kind of watching from just outside of the room, waiting to see what's going to happen. John Stewart ultimately puts the gun down, and Martian Manhunter says, "Well, are you going to kill yourself or not?" And he says, "Huh?" And Martian Manhunter says, "You might as well. It's painfully apparent that you're not suited for this line of work. This profession is a tough and unforgiving calling, demanding strength and character. Our kind are called upon to make crucial decisions daily and act upon them. We also have to be able to live with the consequences of our actions and to learn from our mistakes. You, John Stewart, are obviously not strong enough to handle such responsibility. You are flawed. So do everyone a favor and finish with this grisly act of self-destruction. I am sure Hal Jordan will find a new and more suitable caretaker for your power ring." And then we have frames of silence where they look at each other. John looks at the gun in his hand, he drops it, calls for his ring, and stands up, committed to being a Green Lantern again. They exchange one more moment, a pause, as John Stewart is frowning, and then he says, "Screw you, Jones," and basically stomps off. And the last image of that scene we're left with is kind of a smugly smiling, or maybe a proudly smiling Martian Manhunter who's, I guess, very happy that his friend did not commit suicide. So he was using like reverse psychology or whatever, and I just can't help but wonder if this would not fly at all today. There's a much greater awareness of mental health concerns today, and I think this, indirectly advocating a sort of tough love, reverse psychology approach to talking to someone who's dealing with depression and suicidal thoughts, this would not fly at all today. And it shouldn't. I mean, I think as early as the book of Job, we can take a cue to realize that, when someone is dealing with deep depression, your role, there's a good chance it isn't to talk, that it may just be to sit with them instead of being Job's comforters and trying to, give all the answers or, teach them something. Better to just sit with them and mourn with them and hear their story. I understand that Martian Manhunter understandably might not be in the best position to do that given his involvement with the situation that's causing John Stewart's depression. But neither do I think we should in any way look at this as, and not that I think anyone would today, except for maybe, someone who, maybe a younger reader who just has no exposure to any mental health issues in their own life or in the lives of anyone else that they know. I also think it's really interesting and unfortunate that Martian Manhunter does not offer any form of forgiveness to John Stewart in order to help him move on from this. Instead, what does he do? He appeals to his pride. He knows that Jon Stewart is not going to like the idea of someone telling him he's not qualified to do the job that he's doing, and that Hal Jordan will find a better replacement. So it's his own pride that causes him to angrily get up and move on with his life. Where from a scriptural perspective, what we ought to understand is whether it's something, that we would see as mammoth, like what Jon Stewart did, or something much, more simple and, day-to-day prideful actions that we take, we can't pay back enough to make up for our sins. We need the forgiveness of God. Only God, in his infinite dignity, can give something up that would be able to pay for our sins. And of course, that's what God did through Christ. Now, of course, I'm not surprised that they didn't go that route, with this story, but I do look and I say, that's a shame. I think the last thing that we should do, whether as unbelievers or as believers, when we are facing our sin, is to come out of that valley in any way because of our pride, because of our determination to be better, or anything else that's motivated by pride. The way out of those valleys of guilt and shame that just are overwhelming is to turn to Jesus, who as God himself was the only one capable to pay an infinite penalty that our sins deserve. So an interesting series. I don't think it's essential reading continuity-wise for every DC fan, but again, I'm reflecting on what I would say to myself is the essential issues of DC Comics. And for me, this is essential because of the major turning point for Jon Stewart's character. This continues to reverberate in the early 90s Green Lantern series, which, even if you don't read, if you run into this character later on in Green Lantern, this moment is still referred back to the destruction of Xanshi, the genocide of this entire race because of Jon Stewart's actions is a major part of his character, and it's called back to later on in a major way during the Kyle Rayner run of Green Lantern, when Jon Stewart becomes a really prominent guest character there. So, and I think it's, like I said, a nice taste of the new gods and what they bring to the DC universe, as well as a couple other characters like Dr. Fate and the Demon Etrigan and stuff like that. So, definitely well worth visiting. The writing is a bit rough, but the art and the story beats, I think, make it well worth it. You can pick it up in a 2017 hardcover edition for about $24 on Amazon, and that's through Prime shipping. You can get shipping for free. It's also on Kindle and Comixology for $20, or there's still like a really a good amount of cheaper paperback collections of this printed in 2003 that right now are hovering around $11 or $12. All right, those are my thoughts and memories from Cosmic Odyssey. Next time, we're going to get back into a single character focus, and it's not exactly an origin story, but it is one that takes place in the early years of the character. It's still, I think, a really great read today, well worth any fan of Batman's time. Did I say that sentence right? Anyway, we'll be looking at Batman: The Long Halloween.